Welcome back. I'm Tyler, you're watching Scarfing Scarves, and welcome to the 55th installment of Last Week Lolita News. At the top of the segment, Angelic Pretty unleashed an impromptu bloodbath with the announcement that they had a few extra Cat's Tea Party sets left over after the MTO. This announcement was made at 8:30 at night on a Sunday, and their apparent attempt to keep the sudden demand from crashing their site was evidently successful, give or take a few missing limbs scattered throughout the streets, a bit of torn lace, and enough enraged howling to scare the living daylights out of several small dogs. Miss Gubenhouse's Fluffy was reported to be particularly cross that evening, and the grandmother of three was seen to be saying that she just wished those young ladies would settle their differences like they did in the olden days. Stab them with a hat pin and go into a dead faint when anyone accuses you of foul play. Speaking of flexible moral standards, Angelic Pretty has also released the Innocent Lady series. This is apparently not to be confused with their previous release of Guilty Trollop, and given that it contains no print to speak of, this satin-called feminine naivete has come out with all the bang of a small cough. Wake me up when they start announcing fall and winter releases. This reporter prefers her prints sans judgment of wizened streetwalkers. Transitioning towards channel news, patrons are now getting 2 videos 7 days before the public every week. You can find them by becoming said patron at patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews. And those of you wondering why I thrust this info in the middle of the show should know that I'm onto your habit of clicking out the moment I look like I'm about to stop talking, and I genuinely enjoy your company enough to want to solicit you to join my little bastion of verbosity and utter nonsense. Also, I don't have as much time to answer comments as I used to, but I'll chug coffee until I answer every last patron. Their suggestions have been invaluable, and they've even been so kind as to help me pick the topics of 2 upcoming videos, so to say I appreciate their presence is to say I have a small tendency to take the entire English language and shove it ass first into a single sentence. There's 2 new series on the way. Patrons can watch both videos right now, and I look forward to meeting more people who think this place is better endured with salt, lace, and enough rampant word-making to induce a moment of silence for those who lost consciousness before I paused to breathe. Back to the show at hand, and turning towards social news, Facebook group Ruffle Chat nearly instigated a small riot when an OP asked people to name which prince they'd like to yeet into a volcano. They actually had to tell people to be civil with each other because saying "I don't like blank" is fighting words in this community, and the thread was off to a mighty start with the first complaint right out of the gate being an ardent wish for the disappearance of all gingham ever made. Which I can fully understand if you're talking about this beacon of sin, but you can pry Ribbonberry Bunny and Be My Valentine out of my cold dead hands. The person who listed Cat's Tea Party is currently floating in the Potomac, the one who suggested Flower Egg Garden can fight me personally, and the one who said they'd like to toss anything that attracts the H-Play crowd is doing the Lord's work, except for the fact that it would be more the part where he goes full Genesis Flood and less the part where he feels a little more selective about murdering the shit out of random human beings. Which is to say that while I fully understand your urge to drown this particular release in the depths of everlasting fire, and the only proper response is gagging followed by acquisition of a flamethrower, this is not the only thing that attracts that particular plague of perverted locusts. They are happy to misappropriate any part of Lolita fashion they can get their grubby hands on. It's not just the sweet sub-style on the chopping block, and while it might be comforting to think that the problem could be solved if only anything pastel found its way off the business end of a cliff, degenerates have persisted far longer than EGL has been around, and it's a sad business to know that they will continue to get their rocks off to things that should get the entire planet hurled into a dying star. That said, we still have to live here, so I suppose the best thing to do for now is to pray for another Passover, but this time with less blood and more sworn testaments to never having frick-a-frack to the idea of being 12 years old. Are you nauseous? I'm nauseous, and as that about wraps up the week, we turn towards Last Week Lolita News' next special segment. A solid example of some of the most infuriating parts of human nature, and one more argument in favor of instant karma for being an unrepentant dildo. Welcome to Worst Mother-in-Law Ever. It all started in Ruffle Chat, and with the following tale of an OP we shall call Sarah. I will do my best to summarize without succumbing to an outburst of expletives, and her story went essentially like so. Sarah was wearing Lolita on a date with her husband. They were having a grand time together, taking photos, being cute, and generally hurting no one, and it seemed like a really nice date for 2 people who love and respect each other enough to get the government involved in securing a dual filing of income taxes until death do they part. This is verbosity speak, for they were having a really adorable time together, a time which abruptly came to an end when they ran into her husband's mom in the middle of a public square. A woman who took the opportunity to roll her eyes at Sarah and say she looked cute in a sarcastic tone, an act that would have have been a small annoyance on its own had things not escalated shortly afterward. Because 2 weeks pass by and Sarah finds out that it didn't end on the square. Her mother-in-law had proceeded to bash her to anyone who would listen, call her a weirdo and crazy among friends and her husband's side of the family, and generally act like an intolerable toad of a human being for reasons best sussed out by trained professionals. Sarah ended her story by saying she's now uncomfortable around her husband's family and asked if anyone else had experienced anything similar. To which, amongst similar tales of mother-in-law misbehavior, people responded by advising her to ignore it, call her out, or talk to her in that order. Which is all well and good depending on the person you're dealing with, but it doesn't quite cover the underlying impetus behind the situation. Talking to someone might not even be productive if that person isn't even willing to be honest with themselves. Calling her out depends on your comfort level with confrontation, and ignoring it entirely can be anywhere from challenging to impossible when the next family cookout puts you in her direct line of sight. So, in hopes of speaking directly to Sarah for a moment, providing people in similar situations something to think about, and generally boring the rest of you into a near stupor, I have something to say. 1. Your mother-in-law is a mediocre twitwaffle whose epitaph should read, "Here lies the most underwhelming person ever to be shot out of a panty hamster." And 2. Her actions have absolutely nothing to do with you. They rest entirely on her and are more summoned from the fact that she has lived her life with the intellectual rigor of a rodent than anything you possibly could have done to provoke her to behave like a jealous crotch goblin who's been told they have to share their favorite toy. This woman likely views her son as some kind of possession. She is bitter that you have taken his attention, and given that her life is apparently empty enough that she has the time to besmirch your reputation to the entire family, she's better looked at with a distant kind of pity given that she's spending the latter part of her life disrespecting the most cherished person of a son she claims to love. Your dressing differently is just an excuse she uses to validate her already latent intentions. Anyone who listens to her should know that she's just as likely to say such things about them, and you were entirely better off without giving her any more space in your mind than the pity deserved to the wretched, small, and infinitely forgettable. You deserve the support and respect of your husband no matter what you choose to wear. He'd better be getting off his butt to defend you, and whatever you choose to do for yourself, I hope you do it with the assurance that you are better than the half-cocked gossip of a woman who could hear the words "food for thought" and start salivating like Pavlov's dog. That dog probably had a better disposition. That's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you for watching Last Week Lolita News. This has been Tyler. You've been watching Scarfing Scarves. And before you jump ship to watch something that actually makes sense, you should know that this show is sponsored in part by BB&B. I will be with them at Anime Expo in LA from July 4th to 7th, and Magical Girl Day in Houston, Texas, August 3rd through 4th. Link to their shop below. And to wrap things up with a big fracking bow, I'd like to thank my patrons for being the best group of people this show could ever ask for. You guys make everything we do here possible, and should you like to join a group devoted to seeing too many words shoved into a sentence and or passed out earlier in the show, you can head over to patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews for more content that may or may not exceed the boundaries of patience as a workable concept. I am not to be held responsible for what you experience. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you next time.